Senna felt the king begin to die 3 words into a death sentence. He was halfway through it, for the crime of treason against the Grey Crown. The sentence is, when the thing inside their bond guttered like a candle held too close to an open window. To everyone else in the great hall of Marathon, King Eric Van looked exactly as he always looked, enormous, unmoving, carved out of the same cold stone as the throne he sat on, the most dangerous alpha in 3 generations. The wolf who had ended the Pharaoh-Mark War in a single winter and come home wearing the silence of it like a second crown, but Senna was not everyone else. Senna was bound to him, and through the place where they were bound, she felt the floor drop out from under his strength. It was like standing beside a great fire, and feeling the heat vanish all at once, leaving only the memory of warmth and a sudden, terrible cold. His heartbeat stuttered against the inside of her own ribs. That was the binding. It let her feel things no wife was ever meant to feel, and for half a breath, the king of Marathon was not a king at all. He was a man whose body had simply forgotten how to hold him up. His hand, resting on the arm of the throne, slid an inch. Senna moved before she decided to. She was seated where they always seated her, on a low stool at the foot of the dais, a half step below and slightly behind him, dressed in gray so she would not draw the eye, the bound consort. The leash, though no one said that word in the hall, only in the corridors, and only when they thought she could not hear. She reached up quick and quiet, and closed her fingers around his wrist, as though she were only steadying herself to rise. Then she did the thing she had been bred and bought and bound to do. She went, still, truly, still, the way only a hush can, and she poured that stillness up through the bond, and into him. It was like pressing a hand over a wound. She felt his wolf, frantic and fading, catch the quiet she offered, and seize it. She felt his strength stop bleeding out into the dark. His spine found itself again. His hand stopped sliding. His heartbeat, which had been a moth beating itself against glass, settled back into the slow, deep rhythm of a thing that had no reason on earth to be afraid. The whole hall had seen nothing but a king who paused. Death, Eric finished, and his voice did not shake. It rolled out over the assembled court like distant thunder, and the condemned man at the center of the floor sagged between his guards, and not one of the 50 nobles lining the walls understood that their king had nearly fallen off his throne in the space between 2 words. Senna let go of his wrist. She folded her hands back into her lap and looked at the floor, like a good, dull, useful thing, and her heart was slamming. 3 times this month, she thought. 3. The first time, 8 weeks ago, it had frightened her so badly she'd nearly cried out. She'd gone to Vesna afterward, the old bond witch, who lived in the lower keep among her jars and her tally strings, and Vesna had listened to her describe it, and then gone. Very quiet, which Vesna never did. And now this, in open court, in front of the chancellor, in front of all of them, and it had taken more of her to hold him than it had ever taken before, because the binding was supposed to keep him strong. That was the entire reason they had done it. That was the reason a war king with a wolf, gone half feral, had been chained to a nameless woman from the salt flats, so that her quiet could leash his madness and let him rule. Every soul in Marathon believed the same comfortable thing, that the king's binding was the spine that held the kingdom upright. Senna knew better. Senna had known for 8 weeks and told no one that the binding was not holding him up. It was eating him alive. A forced tether did not feed a wolf. It fed on one, slow and patient and invisible, drawing down the life of the alpha it was supposed to anchor, asking and never giving back, the way a leash will choke a strong dog that strains against it for long enough. He had been straining against it for 2 years. And now, finally, the choking had begun to show. She lifted her eyes just enough to look at the side of his face. The court could not see what she could see from here, the gray pressed in under his eyes like thumbprints, the new sharpness of the bone beneath his cheek, the way his jaw had begun to look like something a sculptor had left unfinished. The strongest man she had ever met was being unmade. One heartbeat at a time, And he did not know why, and she could not tell him. She could not tell him because she already knew what the only answer was. Vesna had given it to her 3 nights ago in a whisper, in the dark, and Senna had not slept since. There was one way to stop a forced bond from killing the alpha it was strangling. The anchor had to break it. And the breaking would not cost the king anything at all. The breaking would cost her everything. On the dais, Eric turned his head, just slightly. Just enough that his gaze brushed over her, that gray, level, terrible gaze that made grown warriors find somewhere else to look, and for one suspended moment, he looked at her as though he had felt something pass between them and could not name it. Senna held very still and let her face be a closed door. Down the lengths of the hall, where the high windows let in a hard winter light, Chancellor Orvain was watching them both. He had not stopped watching them all morning. And when he caught Senna's eye, he smiled, thin and pleased. The smile of a man admiring a tool that was working exactly as he designed it. "You have no idea," she thought, and looked back down at her folded hands. The sentence was carried out. The court murmured and shifted. And Senna sat at the foot of the throne, a step below the man she had been forced to belong to, and turned the unbearable thing over and over in the dark of her mind, the way you worry a stone until it's smooth. If I do nothing, he dies. If I break it, I die. And if I tell him the truth, he will never, ever let me. So she would not tell him. She had already decided that much. The bound consort of Meridon did not have rooms of her own. She had a cot in an alcove off the king's chambers, behind a curtain, close enough to be summoned by the bond at any hour of the night, because a leash, to do its work, must always be within reach of the throat it holds. Senna had stopped resenting it sometime in the first year. Resentment was a fire, and fires needed feeding, and she had never had enough of anything to waste it on a flame that warmed no one. So, instead, she had made the alcove hers in the small ways available to a person who owned nothing: a chipped cup, a pressed flower, a window the width of her 2 hands through which she could see exactly one bare branch, and a triangle of sky. She was sitting under that window, breathing slow to bring her own heart back down, when Castor found her. The king's beta was the only person in the keep who knocked before pushing aside her curtain, which was the entire reason she trusted him as far as she trusted anyone, which was not very far at all. He was a broad, plain-faced man, with a soldier's economy of movement and eyes that missed nothing, and right now, those eyes were doing the thing they did when he was worried and pretending he wasn't. "You held him," Castor said. Not a question. He was tired. He passed sentence on Lord Hune and didn't drop a word of it. Half the hall thinks he's never been stronger. Castor crouched so they were level, the way he did so as not to loom. And the other half didn't see the way your knuckles went white on his wrist. I did. Senna kept her face shut. It was a skill she'd had since she was a child, being passed from household to household. "Here, take the still girl. She'll quiet your old wolf's rages. She eats little." The skill of being looked at and giving nothing back. "It's my function," she said. I steadied him. "That's what I'm for." The word "for" landed in the small room like a dropped plate. Castor's jaw tightened. "It's getting worse," he said quietly. "Isn't it?" It was not a question either, and that was the danger of Castor. He saw too much, and he loved his king too well, and a man who loves too well will do reckless things to save the thing he loves. If she told him the truth, he would go straight to Eric. So Senna gave him the smaller truth, the one she could afford. "He's not sleeping well. The wolf is restless." She turned the chipped cup in her hands. "I'm managing it." "Vesna wants to see you," Castor said. "Tonight, after the king retires. She said to tell you, it's about the tally strings, whatever that means." He studied her. "Does it mean something?" "It means she's an old woman who counts things," Senna said, which was true, and which was also the most enormous lie she had told in weeks. And Castor, good, loyal, watchful Castor, let it pass, because he wanted to believe her. He rose. At the curtain he paused. "They blame you, you know," he said not unkindly, "when he falters, in the corridors." They say the hush is failing, that you're not strong enough to hold him anymore, that the Chancellor should find a better leash. His mouth twisted on the word. I thought you should know what's being said, so you can guard yourself. Senna almost laughed. They think I'm too weak to hold him. They have it exactly backward. She was holding him so hard. It was the only thing keeping him alive. And the holding was the very thing that was killing him, and there was no one in the entire kingdom she could say that to. Thank you, she said instead, for the warning. When he was gone, she sat for a long time with the cup going cold in her hands. The truth was, a stone she carried everywhere, now, and it had two unbearable faces, and she turned it to look at each in turn until she felt sick. Face 1. She could keep doing what she'd done in the Great Hall, pour herself into him, day after day, holding the dying off by hand, but the binding only ever asked for more. Vesna had been clear. The more Senna fed the tether to keep him upright, the faster it drained him, underneath. She was not saving him. She was a hand pressed over a wound that the pressing made deeper. Within a year, perhaps less, he would falter in a moment she could not reach, and the most dangerous alpha in existence would simply stop, like a clock, in front of his court or his enemies, or the whole watching world. Phase 2. She could break the bond. She knew. Now how it was done. Vesna had shown her 3 nights ago, with shaking hands and a face full of grief. There was a right. An anchor could cut the tether from her own side, unmaking the thing root and branch, freeing the alpha entirely. His wolf would be his own again. The drain would stop. He would be strong, stronger than he'd been in years, no longer straining against a leash, and free, for the first time since they'd chained him to her, to choose any mate he wished. It was the only way to give him his life back. And the right would take Senna's in exchange. Not all at once. The witch had been honest about that, which was its own cruelty. Hush. Who severed a binding from her own side, gave up the thing that made her a hush, and a hush, cut loose from the wolf she'd anchored, did not simply walk away. She came apart. Quickly once the tether was gone, and there was nothing left to hold her. Her name first, then her face, then her warmth, gone before the day was out, until there was nothing left for the world that had only ever wanted her, for her function to forget. She would set him free, and in the freeing, she would disappear. Senna looked at the single bare branch outside her window for a very long time. Then she stood, smoothed her gray skirts, and went to keep her appointment with the witch, because there was one thing she still needed to know before she did the unforgivable, the unbearable, the only kind thing left to do. She needed to know exactly how much time she had to fall the rest of the way in love with him before she had to leave him for good. She had not meant to fall at all. That had not been part of any bargain anyone had struck over her head. 2 years ago, they had walked her into the king's chambers like a parcel. A salt-flat girl in borrowed clothes, and a man with hard eyes had stood at the window and not turned around, and the bond witch had cut both their palms and pressed them together and said the words. And Senna had felt a hook sink into the center of her and catch on something in the center of him, and that had been the whole of their wedding. He had not wanted her. She had understood that perfectly. He had wanted the binding even less than she had. She'd felt that too. The way his wolf had snarled and thrashed against the new leash before her stillness dragged it down. They had been 2 prisoners chained at the wrist and told to call it a marriage. For a year, they had been strangers who shared a room. And then, slowly, in the long quiet nights when the bond made them lie, close enough that she could feel him not sleeping, something had changed that neither of them had asked for. It was changing again tonight. She had come back from Vesna's with the same unbearable knowledge she had carried for 3 nights now, sitting cold in her chest, and she had meant only to slip behind her curtain and lie awake until dawn. But the king was still up when she returned, standing at the dark window the way he always stood, a black shape against the night, and the moment she stepped into the room, she felt his wolf turn toward her like a plant toward a window. "You went down to the lower keep," Eric said. He did not turn around. He never needed to. The bond told him where she was, the way it told her where he was. Past midnight, alone, I couldn't sleep. Half a truth. I went to see Vesna. You're unwell? There it was. The thing that undid her every time. The thing she could never have braced for in those first cold months. The flat, gruff, almost grudging concern. As though he had not the first idea how to care about a person, and was attempting it anyway, badly, like a man trying to write with his offhand. I'm well, she said. Are you? He was quiet. And then, because the bond did not let either of them hide much in the dark, she felt the truth before he gave it to her. He was not well, he had not been well in months, and he was so tired underneath all that terrible strength that the tiredness had its own weight, like a stone tied to a swimmer. I'm the king of Meridon, he said. I'm never anything but, well, which was a no, in the only language he had. She crossed the room. She didn't decide to. Her body did it the way it had reached for his wrist in the great hall. She stopped a careful arm's length away, close enough for the bond to ease him, far enough to keep her face a closed door, and she watched the rigid line of his shoulders begin, slowly, unwillingly, to come down. You don't have to do that with me, she said. Do what? Be never anything. But, well, she let a thread of dry humor into it, because humor was the only soft thing she'd ever been allowed to keep. I've seen you nearly fall off your own throne. The mystery's rather gone out of it. A sound came out of him that she had spent 2 years learning to recognize. It was not quite a laugh. It was the ghost of where a laugh would live in a man who had forgotten he was allowed them. But it was something, and warmth bloomed traitorously under her ribs, and she thought, with a despair so total it was almost peaceful, oh, I am in such terrible trouble. Come here, he said roughly. The wolf is loud tonight. I can't. He stopped. His hand had come up to his chest, pressing flat, and through the bond she felt it, the wolf inside him, surging up, frantic and feral and far too strong. The war madness that had never fully left him clawing toward the surface. This was the thing she'd been bound to leash. This was the thing they all feared. And it was rising fast. She closed the distance and put her hand over his heart, and went still. The wolf hit her stillness like a wave hitting a seawall, and broke against it, and slid back down, and quieted. She felt the exact moment it stopped fighting, and simply leaned into the calm she offered, grateful and exhausted. An animal that had been running too long, finally allowed to lie down. But this time, holding the wolf down, she felt the cost underneath, clear as she had never felt it before. The binding took the calm she poured in, used it to leash the wolf, and then, greedy, took something more, reaching past the wolf and into Eric himself, drawing a thin, bright thread of his life down into the dark to pay for the peace she just bought him. She was quieting his wolf, and the very act of quieting it was killing him a little more. Senna's breath caught. Eric, mistaking the catch for something else, looked down at her, really looked. The gray eyes gone soft and unguarded in a way the court would not have believed possible, and said, "Lo, thank you. I don't say it enough for what you do." And Senna, with her hand over the heart she was helping to drain, smiled up at the man she had decided to die for, and lied to him for the second time that night. "It's nothing," she said. "It's what I'm for." She felt him flinch at the word, very slightly, as though he hated it, and she filed that away with everything else she would never get to understand about him, and held him until the wolf slept. Vesna kept the bonlore the way other people kept knives. Carefully, and out of children's reach, and only ever brought out when something needed cutting. Senna had gone back down to the lower keep. The next night, once the king was deep, in the only kind of sleep her stillness could give him. The witch's room smelled of tallow and dried agrimony, and the cold mineral smell of the tally strings. Long knotted cords hung from the rafters, one for every binding Vesna had ever made or studied. Each knot, a marriage, a leash, a life tied to a life. Senna had learned to hate the sound they made in a draft. "You felt it tonight," Vesna said. She did not look up from the cord she was working. "Don't tell me you didn't." You've got the look of a woman who's done the sum and doesn't like the total. It reaches past the wolf now. Senna sat on the low stool, because her legs did not entirely want to hold her. When I calmed him, I felt it take from him. Not just leash the wolf, take his life. To pay for the leash. Vesna's hands stilled on the cord. That's the turn. I'd hoped we had longer before it came. Once a forced tether starts drawing on the Alpha Direct, it doesn't stop. It's found the deeper well, and it'll drink till it's dry. She finally looked up, and her old eyes were wet. And that frightened Senna more than anything she'd said. Child, how long do you think you can keep pressing your hand over a hole in a man and call it healing? You told me there was a right, Senna said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. To break it, from my side. I told you so. You'd understand the shape of the thing. Not so. You'd do it. How long does he have, if I don't? The witch was quiet for a long moment, and the tally strings whispered overhead. A year, she said. Less, if the war on the eastern marches calls him to fight, and it will. The drain doubles when the wolf is roused. Battle would empty him in a season. She set the cord down entirely. But hear me, Senna. The breaking is not a kindness you can do quietly and walk away from. You sever a binding from the anchor's side. You give up the hush in you, and a hush cut from her wolf unravels. You'll go like fog when the sun comes up, not all at once, but faster than you'll want. Your own name slipping before the day is out, and you yourself gone before the next dawn. And by the time anyone thinks to look for you, there'll be no one left to find. I know, Senna said. You told me. I told you so. You'd never do it. The old woman's voice cracked. You think I cut these palms for 30 years, not knowing what I was making? I bound you to him, because the Chancellor would have bound some other poor girl to a feral king, and watched her be torn apart inside a month when his wolf got loose. You held. You're the strongest hush I ever made, and you held. And now, you sit on my stool and tell me you mean to spend yourself like a coin to buy that man a few more years. To buy him his life, Senna said. All of it. Not a few years. He'd be free of the leash. Vesna strong, his wolf, his own. Free to take a real mate, a chosen one, a fated one. He'd get the whole life they stole from him when they chained him to me. She found, to her horror, that she was crying. Quietly, in the still way she did everything. He never chose this. He never chose me. I can give that back to him. That's not nothing. That's the only thing I've ever had worth giving. Vesna looked at her for a long time. You love him, she said. Senna did not deny it. The truth had been sitting between them in the tallow light the whole while, the way it had been sitting in her chest for months, and saying it out loud only made it heavier, not less true. That's exactly why I can do it, she said. Who else would? And does he love you? Vesna asked. And there it was. The question Senna had been refusing to look at, because to look at it directly was to make the whole plan impossible. She thought of the not quite laugh in the dark, the flinch at the word for, the gray eyes gone soft and unguarded. Thank you, I don't say it enough. No, Senna said firmly, and stood, and did not let her voice shake. He's grateful to his leash. That's not the same thing. And it doesn't matter, because I'm not going to give him the chance to talk me out of it. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. When can the right be done? Vesna closed her eyes. The dark of the next moon, she whispered. 11 nights. Then I have 11 nights, Senna said. She climbed the long stair back toward the king's chambers, toward the man asleep in the only peace she could give him and she did not yet know, could not have known. That 2 floors above her, Chancellor Orvine had just finished a very interesting conversation with a guard about how often the bound consort visited the bondwitch after dark, and that he had begun, with the slow pleasure of a man who deals in tools and leashes, to wonder what his most useful instrument was hiding. 11 nights. She thought she had 11 nights. She had far less than that. 11 nights is not very long to love someone for the rest of your life. Senna did the arithmetic in the gray hour before dawn, lying on her cot behind the curtain, with the king's slow breathing filling the dark on the other side of the cloth. And she made herself a decision. she suspected was a mistake. She could spend her 11 nights the safe way, pulling back, going cold, starving the thing in her chest, so that when the dark of the moon came, it would be easier to do what had to be done. People left more easily when there was nothing left to leave, or she could spend them the other way. She chose the other way. She had been careful her whole life, had been useful her whole life, had taken up as little room as a person could take, and still cast a shadow. If these were the last nights she would ever own, she would not spend them being careful. She would spend them looking at him. So, she stayed close. She learned the things she'd been too guarded to learn in 2 years of marriage, that he took his bread torn, never cut, that he could name every constellation over the eastern marches, and not one over the sea, that the scar through his eyebrow came not from a battle, but from falling out of a larch tree at 9. So mortified that she laughed out loud, the first real laugh she'd let herself, in months. She learned that he read his reports twice, the second time moving his lips, because no one had taught him letters until he was 12, and he had never quite stopped being ashamed of it. She learned that he kept a single river stone in his coat, smooth and gray, and would not say where it came from. She learned that when she hummed under her breath, while she banked the fire, an old salt-flat tune, tuneless really, a habit she didn't know she had, his shoulders came down a full inch, and that if she stopped he would, after a moment, gruffly ask her to go on. "I don't sing," she warned him the third night, mortified in her turn. "I didn't ask you to sing," he said. "I asked you to make the noise you make. It's not the same thing. You're quite right. It isn't singing." And then she threw a cushion at the King of Meridon, and he caught it without looking, one eyebrow raised, the corner of his hard mouth twitching, and she thought she would have given a year of the little life she had left just to push that twitch the rest of the way into something real. And the King of Meridon, the wolf who had ended a war, looked at her laughing and forgot to put his guard back up. The not quite laugh she'd spent 2 years learning to recognize finally finished itself. It was a low, rusty, astonished sound, like a door that hadn't been opened in a long time, and it did something to her chest that she would feel for the rest of her short life. "You should do that more," she told him before she could stop herself. "Laugh, you sound like a man who's allowed to." He went quiet at that, in the particular way he had, the way that meant she'd struck something. He was sitting by the fire with a war map half rolled in his lap, and he set it down, and he looked at the flames instead of at her. "I'm not," he said, "not allowed to laugh, not allowed to be anything but careful with myself." His jaw worked. "You don't know what I am, Senna. Under the leash." He said the word leash, the way other men said the names of the dead. "There's a reason they bound me. There's a reason it has to be you. Every night, holding the quiet over me like a lid over a pot. The thing in me that came back from the Pharaoh mark. It isn't a wolf anymore. It's something that wears a wolf." He finally looked at her, and the gray eyes were terrible and honest. "Better a leashed monster than a free one. That's the whole of my life. That's what you keep caged for me. Don't mistake it for something gentler." And there it was, the thing she had needed to understand and now wished she didn't. He believed the binding was a cage around a monster. He believed she was the lock. He thought the leash that was quietly killing him was the only wall standing between Meridon and the beast he was certain he'd become. He had it exactly backward, and she could not tell him, and the knowing of it sat in her like a swallowed stone. "The binding isn't caging the wolf," Vesna had told her. "It's what keeps the wolf feral. A forced tether and a wolf fight each other forever. That's the strain that's draining him. Cut it, and the wolf stops fighting. It comes home. It settles. He wouldn't be a monster set loose child. He'd be a man-made whole. He just doesn't know it. No one does. But us." "You're not a monster," Senna said, quietly, uselessly. "Everyone who's seen the thing I become says otherwise." He picked the map back up. End of conversation. She'd learned to read the gesture. "Get some sleep. I ride to the eastern marches in 3 days. The Pharaoh mark remnants are raiding the border holds again, and the Chancellor thinks the king ought to be seen putting them down himself." Senna's blood went cold. "The drain doubles when the wolf is roused," Vesna had said. "Battle would empty him in a season." 3 days. He would ride to war in 3 days and rouse the wolf, and the leash would feast, and the 11 nights she thought she had would not survive contact with a battlefield. You can't, she said, too sharply. He glanced up, surprised. Can't what? You haven't been well. She fought to keep her voice flat, to keep her face the closed door it had always been. You nearly fell off your throne. Sending you to fight is exactly what a king is for, Eric said, not unkindly. And there was that word again, for, and this time it was him it cut. We're all of us made for something, Senna. I'm made for this. He rolled the map closed. Go to sleep. She went behind her curtain. She lay in the dark, and she did the arithmetic again, and the new total was so much worse than the old one that she had to press both hands over her mouth to keep from making a sound. 11 nights had just become 3. She did not mean to fall asleep against him. The bond did it, pulled her under while she was holding the wolf quiet, the way a tide pulls a swimmer who has stopped fighting it. And one moment, she was lying in the dark with her hand over his heart, and the next, she was standing in snow. It was not snow like Meridon's snow. It was gray, and it did not melt, and it muffled every sound until the world felt packed in wool. Senna turned in a slow circle and understood, with the cold certainty that comes in dreams that are not, dreams that she was inside him, inside the place the wolf went. Inside the Pharaoh mark, 2 years gone, on the worst night of the king of Meridon's life, she found him at the bottom of a ravine. Not the Eric she knew, a younger one, leaner, his face, not yet carved hollow, kneeling in the trampled snow, with his hands fisted in his own hair. Around him the war had gone still, men in gray crown gray, men in Pharaoh mark black, all of them fallen, none of them moving. The silence was the worst of it. A battlefield should roar, she thought. This one held its breath. The snow settled over the fallen and did not melt. Somewhere far off something cried out once, and the wool-thick air swallowed even that until it was only a thread. And standing over the worst of it, where the fallen lay thickest and they wore the gray of his own men, was the wolf. It was vast. It was wrong. It was bigger than any wolf had a right to be, its fur the color of dirty smoke, and where its eyes should have been there was nothing she recognized as a person. No fear, no fury, not even hunger, just a flat animal absence. A door, with no one behind it. And as Senna watched, the wolf turned from the fallen, his own men, she understood. In the war madness it had not known friend from foe, and so it had spared no one, and it looked down at the kneeling boy king with something that was almost horribly like grief. Then it folded back into him, into Eric, the way a shadow folds into the thing that casts it, and the boy in the snow opened his mouth and screamed without making any sound at all. Senna's whole body wanted to look away. She made herself watch, because he had watched it every night for 2 years with no one beside him, and the least she could do, the last thing she could do, was not leave him alone in it. You see, said Eric's voice beside her. She turned. He was here too, the Eric she knew, the grown one, standing in the snow watching his younger self break. Now you see what I am. The leash isn't cruelty, Senna, it's mercy. For everyone who'd be standing where those men are standing, if I were ever let off it, that wasn't you. Her voice came out fierce. That was the war, you didn't know. I should have known. I was their king. I should have been able to stop it, and I couldn't. Because I'm not a man with a wolf. I'm a wolf wearing a man, and the only thing that's ever held it is... He stopped. He looked at her, and even here, even in the worst place in his memory, his face did the soft, unguarded thing. Is you, he said. You're the only quiet I've ever had. You think you're a thing that has to be held, Senna said, and the words came up out of somewhere she usually kept locked. A weapon, someone else, has to keep pointed safely at the ground. I know that feeling, Eric. I've been a thing they kept on a shelf my whole life, and took down when an old wolf needed quieting, and put back when it was done. Useful. She spat the word into the gray snow. Neither of us was ever a person to them, only a function. But that's them. That's not what we are. For a moment, just a moment, the kneeling boy king lifted his head, as though somewhere across 2 years he had heard her. Then the memory swallowed him again. The snow began to come down harder. The bond between them, she could see it here, a thread of light running heart to heart, pulsed and pulsed again, and Senna felt the most dangerous thing of her life begin to happen. It was turning gold. A forced tether was gray. Vesna had told her that. She'd shown her on the tally strings, the dull ash color of a binding made without consent. But the thread between her and Eric, here in the deepest place either of them had, was no longer gray. It was warming, brightening, going the color of a thing that had been chosen. "Eric," she whispered, "wake up, please, wake up." She reached for his face, and the snow and the ravine and the dead all came apart like smoke, and she woke gasping in his bed, with her hand still on his cheek, and his eyes already open, looking at her from 2 inches away. "You were there," he said hoarsely. "In the snow, I felt you. It was a dream. It was the Pharaoh mark." His hand came up and covered hers, holding it against his face, and he was shaking very slightly. This enormous man, shaking like the boy in the ravine. "No one has ever been there with me. I go alone every night, for 2 years. And tonight you were there." His thumb moved over her wrist. "Why are you crying?" She hadn't known she was. She was, though, in the still silent way. She did everything. And she could not tell him it was because she had just watched him carry a weight no one should carry alone, and because the thread between them was going gold, and because gold was the worst possible color it could be. So she kissed him instead, to stop the questions, to stop her own mouth from spilling the truth, to have, just once, the one thing she had never let herself want. He went still for a heartbeat, surprised, undone, and then he kissed her back like a man who had been dying of thirst, and was only now being told he was allowed to drink. His hand slid into her hair. The other came to the small of her back and gathered her in, careful even now, careful as he was, with everything he was afraid of breaking. The bond flared between them, gold now, unmistakably gold, chosen, and it sang in her chest like a struck bell, and it was the single most perfect moment of Senna's entire life, which was exactly when she felt it. Stronger than it had ever been. The brighter the bond burned, the deeper the leash drank. She'd known a deeper bond would drain faster. Vesna had warned her in that ashen little room. But knowing was nothing beside feeling it. Feeling his life pour down into the dark twice as fast. Under the gold, in the place only she could reach, the tether opened its throat and swallowed. She broke the kiss. He chased it, drowsy and amazed and more at peace than she had ever felt him, his forehead dropping to rest against hers. "Stay," he murmured against her mouth. "Don't go behind the curtain, not tonight. Stay here." And Senna, with her heart breaking into pieces too small to ever find again, understood the last cruel turn of the knife. Loving him was killing him faster. Every gentle night, every laugh, every cushion thrown, every gold thread of the bond she'd let herself have, all of it was emptying him quicker. The kinder she was, the sooner he'd die. The cruelty of it was so complete, it was almost elegant. The one good thing she had ever been given would murder him precisely to the degree that she let herself enjoy it. She had thought she had 3 nights to love him in. She didn't even have that. She had to break it now. Before the bond turned so true, she couldn't break it at all. "I'll stay," she lied into his hair, and held him while he slept, and stared dry-eyed at the ceiling, and began to plan the murder of the only good thing she had ever owned. Chancellor Orvain was waiting for her in the cold stone passage outside the Bond Witch's stair, and Senna understood the moment she saw his face that her secret was a secret no longer. "The bound consort," he said pleasantly, "visits the lower keep at strange hours. 4 times this month, a guard mentioned it. Guards do mention things, when one asks." He folded his hands. He had a courtier's hands, soft and clean. The hands of a man who had never once held a leash himself, only ordered others bound. "Tell me, Senna, What does a leash discuss with a bond witch in the dark? I do so dislike not knowing things. She kept her face shut. Herbs. I don't sleep well. He smiled. Here is what I think. I think old Vesna has been teaching you the breaking of bonds. I think you've grown weary of your collar. And I think, the smile thinned, you should understand something before you do anything regrettable. The king is more biddable leashed than free. A strong alpha king takes counsel from no one. A tired one leans on his chancellor. I did not bind him to you to make him well. Girl, I bound him to keep him manageable. He let that land, the leash stays on. You will keep holding it, until he's used up, and then we'll find another quiet little nothing from the salt flats to hold the next one. That is your purpose. Do not develop ideas above it. It should have frightened her. Instead, it did the opposite. It lit something cold and clear and absolutely unmovable in the center of her, because now she knew there was no one coming to save him. Not the chancellor, who wanted him drained. Not the court, who blamed her for his weakness. No one but a salt flat nothing with 11 nights that had become 3 that had become now. Is that all, my lord? She said. Orvain's eyes narrowed. He had expected tears. He had got a closed door. I'll be watching you, he said. You always have been, said Senna, and went up the stair past him, and did not let her hands shake until she was alone. But Orvain did not like loose tools. And that night, while the king sat at his fire with his maps, the chancellor came to him. Senna heard it from behind her curtain, every word, her blood turning to ice, and poured the poison in slow. The bound consort has been studying the breaking of your bond, Majesty, meeting the witch in secret, learning the right to cut the tether. I thought you should know your leash means to slip you before you ride to war and put your trust in her hand, in the dark. The fire popped. There was a long, terrible silence. Then, Senna, she came out from behind the curtain. Eric was standing, and the warmth she had spent 11 nights, 3 nights that morning, coaxing out of him, was gone from his face, scoured clean, replaced by the cold carved king the court knew, and she did not. Orvane stood by the door wearing the small pleased smile from the great hall. Is it true? Eric asked, very quietly. Have you been learning how to break our bond? And here was the moment she had known was coming, and had not let herself look at. She could tell him the truth. The bond is killing you. I'm doing it to save your life. The leash is the poison. You'd be free and strong and whole. And he would forbid it. He believed the leash caged a monster. He would never let her cut it, would chain her closer, would ride to war and be emptied within the season, and die believing he'd protected his kingdom from himself. The truth would kill him. Only the lie could save him. So Senna lied the largest lie of her life, and made it the cruelest, because cruel was the only kind that would hold. Yes, she said. I've been learning to break it. Something crossed his face that she would see behind her eyes for whatever was left of her life. Why? He said, and it was barely a word. Because I never chose this. She made her voice flat. A closed door. She thought of the gold thread and made her voice gray. You said it yourself. We were chained at the wrist and told to call it a marriage. I want my own life, Eric. I want to be more than your leash. Every word was a stone she set on her own chest. Wouldn't you? In my place. She watched it work. She watched the man who had never once been chosen for nothing, the crown forced on him, the war forced on him, her forced on him. Here the one person who'd begun to feel like a choice, tell him she'd been planning her escape. She watched him decide it was true, because of course it was easier to believe than the truth, because a man who thinks himself a monster has been waiting his whole life to hear that even his leash wants to run. The bond between them went gray. She felt it dull, felt the gold die, and it was the worst pain she had ever felt, and she kept her face shut through all of it. Then you'll have it, Arik said. His voice had no bottom to it. Your life. Your freedom. I'll not hold anything against its will, not even the thing that holds me. He turned to the fire so she could not see his face. I ride at dawn. Do what you like with the witch while I'm gone. When I return, you'll be released from the binding by my own word, and you can go wherever salt flat girls go to be free. Eric, get behind the curtain, Senna. She did. She lay in the dark and listened to him not sleep, and felt the leash drink him in the cold and the grief. Faster now, so much faster, and she understood that he would ride to a war that would empty him in a season, believing she had never wanted him at all. She could not let him reach that war. The dark of the moon was 11 nights away. She had perhaps until dawn. Senna rose silently, in the black hour before first light, and went down the stair to wake the bond witch, because the rite that would free him and unmake her could not wait for the moon after all. It would have to be tonight. Vesna did not argue when Senna woke her in the black before dawn. She looked at the girl's face for a long moment in the tallow light, and then she got up, and her hands were steady, and that steadiness was the most frightening kindness Senna had ever been shown. An old woman did not still her hands like that, unless she had already decided to help you do something that would break her heart. He rides to war at first light, Senna said. Battle will empty him in a season. I don't have until the moon. I have until the sun. I know. Vesna was already lifting a cord down from the rafters. One cord among hundreds, ash and gray, knotted twice in the middle. Senna realized with a lurch that it was theirs. Her marriage, her leash. The witch had kept it hanging over her own head for 2 years. Sit, give me your hands, and Senna. The old eyes came up, wet and fierce. When it begins to take you, you do not fight it. Fighting only makes the going slower and the hurting longer. You let it have you. Do you understand? I understand. You don't, Vesna said softly. No one does until it starts, but you will. That was the thing Senna would remember, in whatever was left to her to remember things with, that the unmaking of a marriage and a life made almost no sound at all. Vesna cut the soft of each of Senna's palms with a thumbnail of black glass, the same place they'd been cut 2 years ago, and she pressed the gray cord between them, and she spoke in the old tongue, and Senna reached down into the center of herself, into the place where the hook had sunk 2 years ago, and she took hold of the tether with both hands. It fought her. Of course it fought her. It was a parasite, and parasites do not let go of a full vein willingly. She felt it thrash. She felt it reach, once frantically, toward the sleeping king 2 floors up, trying to drink deeper, to root itself harder, and Senna, weeping silently, said, "No, not him, not one more drop," and she pulled. The gray cord in Vesna's hands smoked, and blackened, and came apart. The tether snapped. It was like a rope going slack across her whole soul. And then like a window thrown open in a sealed room. And then faintly, far off, like the sound of a man, 2 floors above her, drawing the first full breath he had taken in 2 years. It worked. It worked. He was free. That was the last clean thought Senna had before the cost arrived. It came in like a tide over flats. Not pain at first, but absence, a coldness where her edges had been. She looked down at her own hands in the tallow light, and they were still hands, still hers, but she had the sudden, vertiginous sense of looking at them through water, as though some part of her had already stepped back from the rest. She reached for the thought of who she was, and found it there, but loose, the way a tooth is loose, still in its place, but ready to go. Vesna, she said, and her own name for the witch came slowly. It's starting. I know, child. The old woman gathered her in, and Senna felt the warmth of those arms only distantly, as though through a wall. I know. Don't fight it. Let it have you. You did a brave and a terrible thing, and now you let it have you. Senna closed her eyes against the witch's shoulder. Let it have me, she thought. I freed him. That's enough. That was always going to have to be enough. And she let the cold tide come, and the loose tooth of her name began, very gently, to work itself free. Eric felt it at the gate. He was in the saddle, cold and hollowed out and ruined, his column of riders steaming in the dawn behind him, his heart a dead gray stone since the moment in his chambers when the only person he had ever begun to want had told him she wanted to be free of him. He had decided not to feel it. He was very good at not feeling things. And then, between one breath and the next, something cut inside his chest, and the leash he had worn for 2 years simply ceased to exist. He braced for the monster. This was the thing he had dreaded above all dreads, that the wolf, unleashed, would surge up and take him the way it had taken him in the Pharaoh, and that without Senna's quiet to hold the lid down he would become, here at his own gate, the thing that wore a wolf. He braced for the absence to fill with rage. He gripped the reins and waited for the red to come down over his eyes. It did not come. Instead, the wolf, his wolf, the thing he had spent 2 years certain, was a beast that hated him, uncoiled inside him, slow and easy, the way a dog turns 3 times and lies down at last in front of a fire. It had never been feral, he understood, with a horror so vast it had no bottom. It had been fighting. For 2 years it had been straining against a chain it never chose, and the straining had looked like madness, and they had answered the madness with a tighter chain, and the tighter chain had made it strain harder, and underneath the whole grinding catastrophe, his own life had been pouring out into the dark to pay for it. Cut the chain, and the wolf came home. He was whole. He was stronger than he had been since before the war. He sat his horse at the gate of his own keep in the cold dawn light, the most dangerous alpha in 3 generations, finally and completely himself, and he had never been told. No one had told him. She had not told him. He thought of every time he had felt himself weakened in council, and assumed it was the war still in him, the rot of the thing he'd done. He thought of the gray under his eyes that no rest had ever touched, because there had never been any rest, because something had been eating him in his sleep for 2 years and calling itself a marriage. He thought of the river stone in his coat, and the laugh he'd have given a year for, and the way she'd thrown that cushion, and he thought she felt all of it, through the bond. She felt me dying, and she felt me not knowing it, every single day, and she said nothing, and she smiled, and she called it her function. The breaking was a kindness. Then, some cold, clear part of him said, she freed you. She gave you back your own wolf, and your own strength, and your own life. Why would a woman who wanted nothing but to escape you bother, on her way out the door, to first make you well? Why would she risk the witch and the dark and the chancellor's knives to heal a man she was only trying to be rid of? The gray stone in his chest cracked straight down the middle, and through the crack came a fear worse than any battlefield that he had been handed the truth in his own chambers the night before, in the flattest, cruelest words she could find, and had been too busy nursing his own old certainty that no one would ever choose him to hear what the lie was protecting. He turned his horse around. "Hold the column," he told Castor, who had ridden up beside him wearing a frown that had not left his face since the king came down to the yard looking like a man walking to his own grave. "I ride back now, Majesty. Now, Castor." He found the bond witch on her knees on the floor of her own chamber, holding a girl who was beginning, very gently, to disappear. It was not like a body dying. Eric had seen a great deal of dying, and it was nothing like this. Senna was still warm, still breathing, her eyes still open, but the edges of her were going uncertain, the way the far bank of a river goes uncertain in fog, and the gray of her dress and the gray of the floor were beginning, in places, to be the same gray. Vesna was talking to her, fast and low, the way you talk to keep someone with you. "Your name," the witch was saying. "Tell me your name, child. Come on, it's..." The girl's brow creased. "It starts with, I can almost..." "Senna," Eric said from the door, and his voice broke on it. Both women turned. And Senna, fading, forgetting, going like breath off a cold window, looked at the king of Meridon standing whole and strong and undone in the doorway, and a terrible polite confusion crossed her uncertain face. "You're the king," she said slowly, as though reciting something. "I think I was supposed to hold something for you." A flicker of distress. "I can't remember what I was for." It was the word for that finished him. It had always been the word that finished them both. Eric crossed the room and went down on his knees in front of her, The king, kneeling, who knelt to no one, and he took Vesna by the wrist. "Tell me," he said, "all of it now. What did she do?" So Vesna told him. The forced tether, parasitic, drinking him dry one heartbeat at a time. 2 years of it. The drain reaching past the wolf and into the man. A year, at the outside, before it stopped him like a clock in front of his court or his enemies. And the only cure in the world, the anchor cuts the bond from her own side, frees the alpha entirely, and unravels herself doing it. Loses the hush, fades, goes like fog at sunrise, fast, and awake to every moment of it, until there is no one left to hold her name in their mouth. "She has known since the autumn," Vesna said. "She came to me and worked the sum, and chose this, knowing the whole price of it. I begged her not to. I told her she was the strongest hush I ever bound, and that she deserved a life of her own. And do you know what she said to me?" The old woman's mouth trembled. She said it was the only thing she'd ever had worth giving, as though her whole self were a coin she'd been saving up for the privilege of spending on someone else. Vesna's eyes came up hard now, accusing in their grief. And when the Chancellor's lies turned you against her, she did not correct them. She let you believe she wished to be rid of you. She built the lie, majesty, brick by brick, in the cruelest shape she could find. Because she knew that if you understood she was doing this to save your life, you would chain her closer and ride to your war and die, rather than let her go. The only way she could save you was to make you glad to see the back of her. Arik knelt in the gray light and understood, far too late, the size of what he had been given, and the size of what he had thrown away in the same instant. She had not wanted to leave him. She had loved him so completely that she had chosen to erase herself rather than watch the thing they'd done to her go on killing him. The lie in his chambers. "I never chose this. I want my own life. Wouldn't you, in my place?" had not been a leash, slipping its collar. It had been the last and kindest gift of a woman who had been given to him like a parcel, and had decided with no one's permission, and at the cost of her own existence, to give her whole self back. And he had believed it. That was the part that would never stop. He had believed it instantly, had not fought it for even a breath, because believing it cost him nothing. He wasn't already braced to lose. He had spent his life certain he was a weapon to be aimed and a crown to be worn, and never once a man to be chosen. She had spent hers, certain she was a leash to be held, and a use to be made, and never once a woman to be wanted. They were the same wound, wearing two faces. And so when she had handed him his freedom, he had reached for the only story he knew how to tell about himself. Of course, she wants to go. Everyone uses you and no one keeps you. And he had let her walk into the dark with that lie wrapped around her like a cloak. "Senna," he said, turning back to her, taking her uncertain face in both his hands as gently as he had ever held anything. "Senna, look at me." The fog-pale eyes found his polite and lost. The edges of her flickered again, as he watched, a hand's breadth of her going briefly to the same gray as the wall behind, then swimming back. "Do I know you?" she asked. There was no fear in it. That was the unbearable part. She asked it, the way you'd ask a stranger, the time, and the king of Meridon who had ended a war without weeping, who had buried a father and 100 of his own men, dry-eyed, because a king does not break in front of the things that fear him, put his forehead against the forehead of the woman who had died to save him, and wept. "There has to be a way back." He said it into the small space between them, fierce, a command, the way he'd commanded everything, his whole life, as though the world were a thing that could be ordered, which, there has to be a way to undo it. "You cannot undo a breaking," Vesna said. "Once a tether is cut, then make a new one, bind her again, bind her to me. I'll take the leash this time. You cannot force a bond onto a fading. Hush. You'd only speed her going." Vesna's eyes were streaming, but her voice held, and then it caught. Caught on something. She went very still. "Unless," she breathed. "Unless what?" The witch reached out with one trembling hand and turned Senna's face, and looked into the fog of her, and what she saw there made her make a sound Eric had never heard a person make. "There's a thread," she whispered, "under the gray. Gold. Gold." She looked up at the king, wild. "A forced tether is gray, Majesty. It's the color of a thing made without choosing. I've cut 1,000, and they are all of them gray. But the bond between you isn't only gray." Somewhere in these last weeks it began to turn true, and she could not cut the gold. "Do you understand what I'm telling you?" She severed her half, the half they forced on her, the gray. "But a true bond is half yours, made of your choosing. And she had no more power over your half than you'd have over her dreams." A thread of it survived the breaking, because it was never hers to break. Vesna seized his wrist hard enough to bruise. "It's the only thing still holding her to the world, and it is going out. Look at her. It is nearly gone." He looked, and now that the witch had named it, he could feel it, a single fine line of warmth running from the center of his chest into the fading center of hers, the last lit filament in a lamp, burning down every moment it dimmed. "Then I hold it." Eric was already reaching, blind into the center of himself, the way he'd watched her reach into hers. "Tell me how." "I take up the thread, I complete it, I bind her to me of my own. It will cost you. Do you hear me?" Vesna's voice cracked like a whip. "To anchor a fading soul, you give it something of your own to stand on. There's no anchoring without weight, and the weight is you. It may take a piece of you with her. It may take all of you. Reach down that thread and the going can climb back up it just as easily, pull you into the dark at her side, and then Meridon wakes to no king and no queen and a single knight, and a chancellor smiling over both their graves." She gripped him harder. "And hear the rest, because it is the cruelest part. It cannot be forced. That is the whole law of the gold. The thing that makes it gold and not gray, a true bond, must be chosen by both. You can take up the thread, you can offer her your half, you cannot make her take it." And she, the witch, looked at the lost, polite, vanishing girl, and her voice fell to nothing. "She does not remember that she is anyone at all. A bond cannot be sealed with a woman who no longer knows her own name, let alone yours. You would have to bring her back to herself first, far enough back to choose, and you have until the thread goes out to do it." Eric looked at the woman, fading in his arms, the woman he had been chained to for 2 years, and had only truly seen for 11 nights. And for the first time in his life, the king of Meridon was offered a choice that no council, and no war, and no dead father had made for him. Cut his losses, keep his life and his crown and his newly mended wolf, ride to his war, a whole man, and let the salt-flat girl go like fog, and mourn her, and rule, and be safe. Or risk every last thing. He was on a dying thread of gold, and a girl who didn't know his face. It was not a choice, at all. He had been waiting his entire life to be allowed to choose something for himself, instead of being spent on what others needed him for. And here, finally, with the world narrowed to one fading line of light, was the only thing he had ever wanted to choose. "Senna," he said. "Senna, you hummed when you banked the fire. A salt-flat tune, no tune at all, and when you stopped, I'd ask you to go on, and you'd pretend you didn't know you were doing it." His voice shook. "You take your bread torn. Like me. You threw a cushion at me, at the king of Meridon, and I caught it without looking, and you laughed. The first real one in months. And I told myself I'd give a year of my life to hear it again, and I meant it. And I have so much more than a year to give you now, because you bought it for me." He pressed her cold hand flat against his chest. Over the heart, she had refused to let the leash drink dry. "You told me in the snow that neither of us was ever a person to them, only a function. You were wrong, Senna. Not about them. About you. You were never a function to me. You are the only quiet I have ever had, and I don't want my leash back. I don't want a hush. I don't want one single thing you can do for me. I want you. The woman who keeps a pressed flower and one bare branch in a window the width of 2 hands, and won't say where her river's stone. The fog-pale eyes flickered. Something moved behind him, far down, like a light seen through deep water. Came from, Eric finished, barely a breath. Senna, come back. Choose to come back. Please. For one endless moment, nothing. The thread dimmed another notch. Vesna pressed her knuckles to her mouth. Then, very faintly, in a voice like the last of a candle guttering in a draught, I never told you about the Riverstone. You didn't, Eric said, half a laugh and half a sob, holding on to that thread of her with everything in him. You never told me. I asked, and you wouldn't say, and you got that look you get when I've come too close to something true. You're getting it now, Senna. You're in there. I can see you. It hurts, she whispered. The edges of her flickered, gray and gold. At war, Vesna said. She said not to fight it. She said, let it have me. Vesna was telling you how to leave kindly. He cupped her face. I'm asking you to stay cruelly. I'm asking you to fight. I know it isn't fair. You spent your whole life being told the only kind thing you could do was take up no room and give yourself away, and now I'm on my knees asking you to be selfish, to want something, to want this, to want to live. His voice cracked clean through. Because I want it. I want you to live, not to hold me, not to quiet me, just to be in the world, taking up all the room you like where I can find you. He pressed her palm harder to his heart. Take the thread, Senna. It's half yours. It always was. Take it and I'll hold the other end so hard the going can't have either of us. He felt the gold thread between them, thin as spider silk, almost spent. And he did the thing the witch said could take all of him, and did not hesitate, because hesitation is for men who still have something left to lose that they haven't already lost. He reached into himself and gave the thread something of his own to stand on. His strength, the very strength she'd bought him with her unmaking, poured back down the gold, the way she had poured her stillness up into him in the great hall 100 years and 11 nights ago. Here, he told the dying light, stand on me. I'm done being spent on everything but this. The thread caught. He felt it, the way you feel a held breath, finally let go. The gold flared between them, bright and sudden. A struck bell ringing down a corridor, and then it pulled, hard, the wrong way toward the going, toward the gray. And for one black instant, Eric felt the unmaking reach back up the thread for him too. He felt the cold edge of it begin at his fingertips, felt the feelings start to leave his hands, felt some far part of himself begin to go uncertain at the edges the way hers had, and he understood in his bones that the witch had not exaggerated by a single word, that he could lose himself here on this floor at her side, and the kingdom would wake to nothing at all. He chose her anyway. He held the thread, and chose her with every hour he had ever wasted being careful, with every laugh he'd swallowed, and every want he'd talked himself out of, and every cold night he'd spent certain that no one would ever keep him. He bent his head over her, and over the wild golden-gray thunder of it. With the cold climbing his wrists, he pressed his mouth to the place where her shoulder met her throat, the old claiming the mate's mark, given freely, and for the first time in his life chosen by no one but himself, and he asked, against her skin, the only question that had ever mattered or ever would. Choose me back, he breathed, not because you were made to, not because it's useful, not to save me. I'm already saved. You already did that. This isn't a debt. Choose me back, because you want to, because there's something in this world you want for yourself, Senna. Do you want to stay? Far off, on the other bank of the fog, the salt-flat girl who had never once in her life been permitted to want a single thing for herself, heard a man ask her what she wanted, and she had to think. That was the terrible, beautiful part. She had to learn the answer, right there, at the edge of the dark, because no one had ever asked her the question before and she had no practice at it. She turned it over, the way she turned everything over. Do I want to stay? Not, am I needed? Not, am I useful? Not would it help him? Just, did she want it? Did she want the bare branch and the riverstone and the rusty, almost laugh? and the room he kept telling her to take up. Did she want to be a person instead of a function? Did she want to live? Yes, she said. The word came faint, then less faint, then sure. And on every repetition it grew stronger, as though each yes were a stone she was setting under her own feet to stand on, building herself a shore to climb out onto. Yes, I want. Yes, I want to stay. I want. Her hand found the back of his neck, gripping alive. I want you. She turned her head and she answered him, pressing her own claim to the curve of his throat, giving back exactly what he had given. She marked the king of Meridon as hers, claiming him, choosing him, selfish at the very last and glad of it, and the bond between them, slammed home gold and whole and true, sealed now from both sides by two people who had finally, against every hand that had ever spent them, chosen each other on purpose and out loud. The fading stopped. The gray ran out of her like water out of cupped hands, and the gold ran in to fill the place it left. Her edges found themselves and held. Her warmth came back into his arms all at once, sudden and total, and her weight became real and solid and staying, and she gasped. A great, whole, living gasp. The breath of a swimmer breaking the surface of deep water with the light above her at last, and the cold let go of Eric's wrists and slid back down into the nothing it had come from. Cheated of them both, her eyes, when they opened, were hers, clear and gray and present and brimming, and they were looking at him, and they knew him. You came back, she said, wondering, her fingers rising to trace the new mark on his throat, as if to be sure it was real. I felt the bond go quiet, and I thought you'd ride to your war hating me. I thought the last thing you'd ever feel from me was a lie. I discovered the truth too late to stop you, Eric said, his forehead dropping against hers, both of them shaking, both of them whole. A whole morning too late. I'll spend the rest of my life being early to everything else. I swear it to you. Behind them, Vesna sat back hard against her shelves of jars and wept into her apron and laughed and wept again. An old woman who had cut 1,000 bonds in her long life and tied 1,000 more and had never once, in 30 years of it, seen one chosen back from the very lip of the dark. The reckoning with the Chancellor came later that same morning, and it was brief, because there is very little a man like Orvan can say to a king. He has spent 2 years quietly murdering. He had built his whole soft-handed power on a tired and biddable alpha, a king drained too low to rule without leaning on his Chancellor. He found himself instead in a council chamber facing a man stronger and clearer than the Grey Crown had seen in a generation. A man who laid the truth of the parasitic binding bare before the assembled lords in a flat, carrying voice, and named the Chancellor, who had built it and kept it and meant to build the next one. And watch the color leave that clean and clever face. Orvain had spent his life dealing in leashes and the people they were fastened to. He discovered, far too late himself, what a free king does with such a man. And the bound consort who had once sat on a stool at the foot of the dais stood that morning at the king's right hand, not a step below, not behind, not in grey chosen so. She would not draw the eye but beside him, where she had put herself, taking up every inch of room she pleased. The bond did not fix everything. Senna had learned enough of grief by then to be suspicious of anything that claimed it could. Eric still dreamed of the ravine sometimes. The wolf still remembered the cold of that place, and there were nights he woke with the war in his throat. But the wolf was his own now, and it came home easily, and on the bad nights he no longer went down to the Ferromark alone. She was there in the grey snow at his side, the way she'd promised without ever saying it. And a thing witnessed by two is never quite as heavy as a thing carried by one. And Senna was learning, slowly, clumsily, the strangest skill of her life, how to be wanted for nothing useful at all, how to take up room, how to hum without apologizing for it, and keep a pressed flower where anyone could see it, and tell a king, on an ordinary morning, where the river stone had come from, her mother. The one thing she'd been left with when she was given away. He'd held it for a long time after she told him, and given it back, and never asked her to explain why she'd wept. The court got used to her, They had to. She wasn't going anywhere. The whispers that had once called her the leash learned, eventually, to call her the queen, and the ones who couldn't were welcome, as Eric put it dryly one evening, to take it up with their king, who happened to be unreasonably, immovably, openly fond of his mate. Now, in the pale light of a winter morning, Senna woke first. Eric was still asleep, beside her. Deeply, easily, the sleep of a man no longer being drained in the dark, one arm heavy and certain across her waist. No leash. No fog reaching up to take her. No secret stone turning over and over behind her eyes. Just the gold bond humming warm and whole between them, chosen on both ends, holding. She watched him sleep a while, the way she had once watched him in a great hall, and prayed. No one would see what she was hiding. There was nothing to hide now. There was nothing left to be useful for. There was only this, a woman who had broken a bond to set a man free, and a man who had chosen it back to keep her in the world, both of them finally allowed to simply stay. She settled back against his shoulder and let her eyes drift closed, and they slept.